briefed them on the dismissal of one of its local staff. Now, it is my position, and I draw inspiration only from the Foreign Service Regulations, that it was not the business of the ambassador or the business of any ambassador and or representative or high commissioner to dismiss any staff in the embassy, because the ambassador is not the administrative and technical head of the mission. The ambassador is not the administrative and technical head of any embassy. It is the deputy head of mission that is the administrative and technical head of that embassy. In fact, it is the deputy head of mission that should ordinarily advise the ambassador on issues of foreign policy and diplomacy. It is the deputy head of mission that should ordinarily guide the ambassador and or high commissioner as to what is the need of that particular station. The first issue that I have with Sheikh Tijan Haidara's narration is the fact that he delved into the administrative matter of that mission without consultation with the deputy head of mission. Ordinarily, the ambassador should have held himself in such high esteem to the extent that he would never have to descend so low as to sit down to take disciplinary action against a member of staff, especially a local staff. That communication, that instruction should have been given to the deputy head of mission. If there was any cause, any reason whatsoever, where the performance or non-performance of a local staff necessitated their dismissal, it should have been in consultation with the deputy head of mission, who is the technical and administrative head of that station. The ambassador taking it upon himself to write a dismissal letter to dismiss any staff of that embassy, albeit local staff, without due consultation with his technical advisor, it is like, okay, I'll give you an example. The deputy head of mission can be likened to a permanent secretary in a ministry. Every permanent secretary has a minister. The minister is seen to be the head of that ministry. But substantively, it is the permanent secretary that heads the administrative and technical bit of that ministry. I don't imagine where a minister of state will get up and decide to fire any staff or decide to move any staff from that ministry without due consultation with the permanent secretary who those staff ordinarily reports to. Every single staff in that embassy, as per the Foreign Service Regulations, as per diplomatic norm and protocol and custom, does not report to the ambassador. They report to the deputy head of mission. That is the chain of command. And the deputy head of mission in turn reports to the ambassador. And therefore, if the ambassador saw the need to dismiss any staff, it should have been, usually it would even emanate from the deputy head of mission as the chief technical staff in that embassy, the chief administrator in that mission, to speak to the ambassador, to brief the ambassador on the conduct of this particular staff. The ambassador should have maintained his position, maintained his dignity, maintained his class, and given an instruction. Not a verbal instruction, because if you pay attention to Vincent's letter narration, he said that when the ambassador took up office, he gave him, Vincent, a verbal instruction to dismiss staff. That should not happen in an embassy. That should not happen in any foreign mission abroad, because every action administratively must be documented, must be filed. And in most instances, copies be sent to headquarters. headquarters, in this instance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A proper briefing and narration of accounts of anything that happens in that embassy that necessitates the dismissal of a staff must be reported back to head office. Yes, they can take the decision because local staff, the embassies have the legal standing and mandate to hire and fire local staff. But albeit, when those staffs are recruited, obviously headquarters is made aware, is made known that X, Y, and Z are part of the staff of this embassy. It is logic. Now, when you fire such a staff, or you take the decision to fire a staff, you cannot give a verbal instruction. There should have been a written instruction from the head, from the ambassador, to the deputy head of mission. And even before that instruction, there should have been disciplinary procedures and measures taken. You just don't fire a staff. There should have been a warning letter. The staff should have been spoken to. There should have been a reoccurrence of that. And therefore, if it is deemed between the technical staff in that embassy that a particular local staff is not fit for purpose, then that direction to fire that staff must always come from the deputy head of mission. And I'm saying this because this cuts across every single foreign embassy or mission that we have abroad. And I hope that somebody can watch this video and somebody can understand, and even staff, because it's for the benefit of staffs that work and that are now working and are now stationed in our foreign embassies abroad, that the ambassador, the high commissioner, does not have the right, does not have the legal power, does not have the standing to dismiss any staff. That dismissal, albeit, might come as an instruction from the ambassador in consultation with the DHM, but it should ordinarily stem from the DHM to that staff. So I find that very problematic that the ambassador decided to take matters in his own hands and decided that he was going to fire a staff. Now, the ambassador mentioned that certain staff were coming. Okay, I'll jump that bit because I've dealt on that. Now, the ambassador said that in his narration that there has been various issues of insubordination by the deputy head of mission. And the ambassador is now reporting to headquarters to inform headquarters of the insubordination of his deputy. The deputy head of mission, just as the ambassador mentioned in his letter or in his narration, is there to give technical support to that ambassador. An ambassador and a deputy head of mission cannot be at loggerheads, because what happens, you cripple that mission. That mission cannot advance any of its agenda, because one person should have the technical know-how, one person should be experienced in diplomacy, one person should be experienced and grounded in foreign policy affairs, one person should be experienced and understands the needs of Gambia's diplomatic presence in that particular location. That person has to understand the cultural needs of that location, the economic needs of that location, the societal needs of that location, and the diplomatic need of that location. And that particular DHM would then, based on his expertise and knowledge, be able to guide and formulate policies, come up with programs that can aid the ambassador, who is a political appointee representing the president. And this is what people need to understand. That when anybody could be an ambassador, and this is what I keep saying, President Barrow has the right to appoint a monkey as an ambassador if he believes that that monkey will represent the interest of his government and by extension the country abroad. It is his prerogative. That is why the Foreign Service Regulations that has been there since time immemorial, that was drafted by the founding fathers of the Gambia Civil Service, decided upon them in their wisdom that from the DHM, from the deputy head of mission, come right down, these staff would only be positioned, be stationed to these embassies at the recommendation of the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in consultation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And when this is done, it is obviously given its blessing, its ratification, you may call it, or whatever you call it, its endorsement by either the Public Service Commission or the Personnel Management Office, which is the PMO, dependent on the rank of the individual that's being posted. But the Foreign Service Regulation states clearly that from the deputy head of mission downwards, the appointment would be at the recommendation of the Permanent Secretary. Because the Permanent Secretary is the administrative and technical head of headquarters of the Foreign Ministry. They understand, they know the needs, they understand, they see the strength, the weaknesses of every staff in that ministry. They can better place a person. They can say, okay, Modu is very good. He understands the dynamics of the relations between Gambia and Senegal. He understands the cultural, the political, the diplomatic relations that has existed in time immemorial between the Gambia and Senegal. Modu should have been adequately and actively involved in bilateral meetings between the Gambia and Senegal, understanding what is the interest of Gambia's representation and presence in Dakar. What tangible returns of diplomatic nature, of economic value, of economic viability would it bring back to base, to home, to Gambia by its presence in Senegal? They have to have the technical understanding, the required experience, the required skill, and a common knowledge of diplomacy and the needs, recognizing the needs of the Gambia in that particular mission. Because if you don't understand the needs of the Gambia, you don't know what the Gambia wants in its presence in Senegal, how can you bring about tangible returns to your home country? How can you leverage on the benefits that Gambia can have in that country that can come back and trickle down to the average Gambian? That is the reason for diplomatic presence. In 1961, when the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Practices was established, it was because states came together and decided that there has to be a legal framework that would regulate the affairs of states, a legal framework that would regulate the affairs of diplomats, of personnel representing the interests of their country in foreign nations. And that is why every single diplomat you see abroad, every foreign mission that is in any country is guided by the convention, the 1961 convention on the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Practices. This is the Bible, it is the Quran of the diplomatic corps, of diplomatic relations between states. Now, you have to be able to understand that. And the person that is better fit to see the strength, the need for that mission is the Permanent Secretary. Because the Permanent Secretary is the head of the diplomatic service. I don't know if people know this or are aware. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is not the head. The Minister, I repeat, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Governments Abroad is not the head. They report to the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because this is the person that has the technical prowess, the technical expertise, the know-how, has institutional memory of his ministry, of his mission, and what interest his staff should serve abroad. Now, it becomes very problematic, because if you read the narration of Vincent, he said that how can the ambassador do a certain act because he was new and the ambassador was new? That is an abomination in diplomatic parlance. How can you have an ambassador who's new, and a deputy head of mission who's new, representing a mission abroad. It defies logic, it defies purpose, it defies common sense, and it defies and it goes against the Foreign Service regulations. And that is why the Foreign Service regulations, it clearly states that except in exceptional circumstances, that every staff that is representing in a foreign mission abroad must come back to home base, to headquarters, 4 years. 4 years after you have been stationed abroad. There's a reason for that. So even though there's continuity with the ambassador, who is a political appointee, so obviously if the ambassador is representing the interests of the president, representing the interests of the government, representing the interests of the country abroad, they can serve as ambassadors for as long as the president wants. They serve at the pleasure of the president. Their appointment is at the pleasure of the president. But the technical staff who reports back to headquarters is recalled, or not, recalled is not the right word, but comes back, yes, recall, comes back to base after 4 years. And the reason why the Foreign Service regulations also state that when you are called back, you have to spend 2 years at headquarters, because you need to understand the movements, the ins and outs. You need to understand, you have to have institutional memory and knowledge of how the ministry works. Now, what do we see in our foreign mission? If you find favor with whoever is at the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are people who have been stationed in our embassies and in our missions, and even though the Foreign Service regulation says that they can only be there after 4 years in very exceptional circumstances, these people have been there forever. Some people have been serving in missions abroad for over 10 years, 15 years, 16 years, as if it is their birthright. It violates the very spirit. It violates the very intent of the Foreign Service regulation. When the drafters of the Foreign Service regulations looked at the mischief behind these provisions, they had something in mind. They had something in mind. They don't want you to be too comfortable. You're working. And not only are you working, but you have to build a foreign service cadre. You have to build a foreign service cadre. How can you develop diplomats if you have one serving staff serving in a mission for 20 years? How do you have institutional knowledge passed down from one staff to another? You have a staff that is serving in one mission for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, as if they are God. As if they are not replaceable. As if nobody else can do the job. And when disaster strikes, what happens? You send a new person who has absolutely no experience, no knowledge of that outfit, and you expect them to perform at a certain level. No, you have violated the Foreign Service regulations in the first place. You have violated the Foreign Service regulations in the first place. Train your staff. That is why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a specialized ministry within government outfit. Because it is not everybody that can serve. It is not the reason why you don't see people talk about career lawyers. You don't hear people talk about career doctors. You don't hear people talk about career engineers, but you hear people talk about career diplomats. There is a reason why it's called a career diplomat. You build them, you nurture them, you make them understand your interest, you train them adequately. How can you send a staff to a foreign mission to represent the interests of the Gambia abroad. These are staff that have never gone to any foreign service course or training. What are they going to do there? It becomes a kabudu. It becomes a business of who you know. People are posted to the foreign service. People lobby for it. I held a very senior position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I can tell you hands down, people will go to the permanent secretary and beg them. I have had instances where people will come and say, I'm fighting with my husband. We are going through a divorce. Send me abroad. Post me to a mission. I have had people, I have seen examples people whose husbands are abroad, and they say to the permanent secretary or whoever, help me so that I can go and join my husband. He lives there, so I can go there. There are people who are being posted because they have kids who should be in college, who wants to give their kids better education, and they go and lobby to be posted abroad, because when you're abroad, you know your kids would be paid for by government of the Gambia while you serve. It becomes a kabudu. And that is why the foreign service becomes redundant. It becomes like a lame duck. Because the very interest, the very purpose, the fundamental purpose, the foundations of representing the country, representing abroad, is not the interest of the country. It is self-interest. It is positioning, putting yourself at a comparative advantage over your colleagues. And it is basically who you know, because you have very hard-working staff who are in the ministry, but they would never be posted abroad because they don't have connections. They don't have a good rapport with the person that is responsible for stationing them. So you leave them to suffer. You see people who are sent on missions abroad. I know of people, of individuals who are sent. They are supposed to serve 4 years. They are recalled back to Banjul after 2 years. Recalled back. Because they do not have a good rapport with whoever is there. They haven't found favors in their eyes. And they recall them back. Yet you have somebody there for 16 years serving in that mission. As if it's their father and mother's property. As if it is their inherent right to be there. You have a foreign service where people are fired because of their inefficiency. People are fired because they're ineffective. People are fired because they cannot man offices locally. And then all of a sudden you send them to the foreign service to represent your interests abroad. That is stupidity. It is foolishness. You cannot serve well locally. Your performance locally is not even admirable to an extent that they want to get rid of you. And they send you to represent and be the face of the Gambia abroad, to represent the interests of the Gambia abroad. Does that make sense? And the foreign service cannot perform effectively if you do not have a stop with political interference. Political interference, the work of the technical staff must be left with the technical people that know the technical, that have the technical know-how, that have the technical capability to run effectively a robust foreign service that would be the admiration of every Gambian and represents the interest of the Gambia to maximize the very profitable potentials of Gambia and every single Gambian in the Gambia. That is the foundation and basis of a foreign service. You cannot make the foreign service a dumping ground. You cannot get people who are not fit for purpose, people who cannot write a sentence in English, people who cannot communicate, people who don't even know what a non-verbal is, people that cannot even write diplomatic notes, and you send them to represent your mission abroad. It is suicidal. It is suicidal. Every single person, before you go to a mission abroad, you must have been schooled and understand the foundations of diplomacy. You should understand the nitty-gritty of foreign policy. You should be able in your sleep to state accurately, precisely, and to the point what is the Gambia's foreign policy and what is the Gambia's interest in that particular mission. You're in Havana. What is the interest of the Gambia in Havana? Do you understand the bilateral agreements that are there between the Gambia and Cuba? Have you studied them? Do you have a historical perspective, analysis, knowledge of what relation, what ties, what diplomatic ties have been there between the Gambia and Cuba before you set foot in that mission? Do you know how many agreements are there that have not even gone to parliament? They have not been ratified? Before you send a staff to a particular mission, get them to do the work. Let them understand. They should know to their fingertips the needs of the Gambia in Cuba. They should know to their fingertips the needs of Gambians residing in Cuba. They should be able to maximize the very best of Gambia's interests in Cuba. What are the returns that we have from our foreign service? I hear people in parliament saying, oh, you have to cut the budget line, you have to cut representation. No, that is wrong. It's people who don't understand and don't know the need of the foreign service. Every country where you go, a foreign service is expensive to run. A diplomat is not a cheap person. A diplomat is not a cheap boy. That is why you don't put any kankuran as a diplomat. Because running a mission abroad is not cheap. You cannot have a mission abroad and you run it like a mechanic garage. No way. No way. That is why the rights and privileges that comes with a diplomat is at an astronomical high. That is why diplomats are respected the world over. Because a diplomat has to be a person of good standing, a person of substance, a person of integrity, a person of wisdom, and a person of vast knowledge and understanding of diplomatic relations. They need to know and be able to identify what is the wish for the head of state of this country. What does he want for his government? What does he want for his people? You're not posted because you want to go and join your sister. You're not posted because you want to make money. You're posted because you have to go and deliver. And you must possess the required knowledge, skill to deliver. You appoint a deputy head of mission who is clueless about diplomacy, and you get an experienced force secretary, and that force secretary is expected to report to the deputy head of mission who is clueless about issues of diplomacy, doesn't even understand, never worked in the foreign ministry, doesn't even know the needs of the foreign affairs, cannot even put a pen to paper in a diplomatic note. Are you not causing disaster? You have an ambassador who is new. You have a deputy head of mission who is new, as stated in his letter, do not understand the needs of that particular location, and that is why everything we saw is happening. Because it was the blind leading the blind. It was the blind leading the blind. No matter how knowledgeable you are, no matter how experienced you are, one particular mission that you admire at this particular point, I don't know what any other person says, but when I look at it from a diplomatic lens, when I look at it from the lens of performance, one particular mission that you can tell that is adequately and well manned is the High Commission in London. It's the High Commission in London. You have a seasoned diplomat who has walked the world over, representing the president's interest, representing the Gambia's interest, but you have a deputy head of mission who understands. The deputy head of mission in London is not a new deputy head of mission. He rose through the ranks. He rose through the ranks. At some point, he reported to me. And now he's deputy head of mission. So when His Excellency Fatou Bensouda arrived at her station, obviously she has a deputy head of mission that can help her It does not matter the experience. It does not matter the technical skill. It does not matter the knowledge that Fatou Bensouda has. She needed a very effective, knowledgeable, a person that understands the station to guide her, because that is her support system. She needed staff that know the need of the UK and the Gambia's relationship with the UK and how to leverage on that for the betterment of Gambia. For the betterment of Gambia. And you if you see and understand, and if you had experience prior as to how the Gambian High Commissioner was being manned and handled, you can see a trend, a positive trend. You could see them getting better every day. Now things are being done electronically, and that is because you have staff that understand the needs, staff that have knowledge of that particular station, and staff that understand are grounded in diplomacy and foreign policy issues. But imagine you had a deputy head of mission that's new, and you had Fatou Bensouda that's new, and you send them to UK to represent your interest. It's a fiasco. It's a disaster, because they don't understand the needs of that mission. They don't have historical memory. They don't have historical knowledge of that mission. Fatou Bensouda never worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She wouldn't have had privilege, knowledge of what goes on in that mission. But when you have a deputy head of mission and you have a brilliant ambassador, it's a seamless work. Now let's go to Vincent's letter. I told you to pay particular attention to the part where he said, the ambassador is this, the ambassador is a womanizer, the ambassador got a girl pregnant. It is the responsibility of Vincent to report back to office. But Vincent is saying, I was going to keep these things until I die. Then you are not performing. You have violated the terms of your employment. You have violated the general orders. You have gone against the code of conduct of civil servants that governs you and your employment. Because it is not your prerogative. It is not your responsibility to say, I will keep something until I die. It was your responsibility to report back to your principal, who's the permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All the things that you have listed, all the things that you have enumerated, these are things that should have been documented. We don't want to now hear your verbal position on things. We don't want to hear your narration. We don't want you to see now to be fishing out for evidences. No, these are things that should have been documented. You said people have complained to you. People have said that the ambassador is following people's wives. Do you have these things documented? Do you have these things reported? Have you sent them to Home Office? To headquarters? I know you mentioned that with regards to the payment of a bill, you sent a letter to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and they did not respond. Of course, that is what should have happened. If they don't respond, the buck shifts to them. The buck shifts. But your position is very clear, is that you have documented these things. But you can't come now and start telling us that it means you are an accomplice to the the illegal act of the ambassador. It means you are not better than the ambassador. I'm sorry. I don't know what the investigators are going to investigate, but based on your narration, based on all the things that you have enumerated in your account, you are not better than the ambassador. Because you said, if for example, you had not fallen out with the ambassador, you said you were going to keep these things until you go to your grave. You said you would go with them to your grave. at the detriment of the image of the government of the Gambia. Because the Gambia government is not present in Havana, Cuba. They don't know that the ambassador was a constant embarrassment to the Republic of the Gambia. They don't know that the ambassador was a constant embarrassment to the diplomatic corps of the Gambia. They didn't know that. But you had the responsibility to correct this. You had the responsibility to make this known. But what did you do? You said, no, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to consider. So what we know and what I'm sure of, based on my analysis on the various letters, if you had not had a fight with the ambassador, these things would not have come out. You said the ambassador comes to work drunk. You said the ambassador comes to work at 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. Have you ever reported this as the deputy head of mission, as the DHM, as the person who has the technical responsibility, the administrative responsibility of that mission? What did you do? Did you inform your permanent secretary? It was your responsibility to inform the permanent secretary of such happenings. You don't wait now and list 27 different accounts of things that happen when these things are not corroborated by way of report to headquarters. Yes, I know you mentioned a bit about the Christianity card, pitching religious card, but these are things that you should have reported. If I walked in that mission as DHM, the ambassador treated me like that the first time, everybody would have known. Every single person in headquarters would have known. But you don't sit there till everything erupts. And secondly, let's go back to the account of the deputy head of mission. The boss in that embassy, the person who the deputy head of mission reports to is the ambassador. For you, if the ambassador said he's not going to give you the keys to that car, that utility car, it was not your business to forcefully go and try to take the keys. That is insubordination. I don't care what it was. You could have been in the right. Your responsibility again was to call the permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, say to him, Mr. X, Mr. Y, this is what is happening. I don't have a utility car. The ambassador has the keys. Explain the circumstances by which the ambassador took the car keys. It was your duty. It was not your responsibility to barge into the office of the ambassador. And I know in your account, in Vincent's account, it says that I walked into his office to collect the keys and 3 people held me. Nobody is stupid here. You don't walk into an office to collect the keys and people just suddenly get up and hold you down. It makes no sense. That's utter rubbish. That's not speaking truth. That defies logic. You absolutely went into that office for a confrontation. You went into that office for a confrontation. And because you went into that office for a confrontation, you were held back. You didn't walk nicely to just go pick up a key. In fact, let's assume that your first narration was right, that yes, you walked into the office and they held you back. If you had gone into your ambassador's office and they held you back, you said you were taken out, what was your business to go back into that office at 4 o'clock as you narrated? You had no business to go back into the ambassador's office to collect a key at 4 o'clock. You had already said he refused to give you the key. You went in there, you guys got into a fight, you said you were taken out. Why would you go back into the office? That is insubordination. That is against a diplomat's practice. You don't confront your ambassador openly. The ambassador could be doing things that are wrong. The ambassador could have been the worst person on earth. Your duty was to document these things and make a report to headquarters and sit down. You don't have a car key, take a taxi, go home, make a report to headquarters. Don't go to work if you don't have a car to take you to work. Let headquarters deal with it. The ambassador is answerable to the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Corporations and Governments Abroad. What did the ambassador say he did? And I believe that account because the ambassador would not lie on the person of the Permanent Secretary. He said he called the Permanent Secretary and the Permanent Secretary addressed the meeting over the phone. Over the phone. Oh yes, I read the fact that he said he had an extra key. But that is after he had 2 fights, 2 confrontations with the ambassador, and suddenly, yeah, click, click, kung, kung, ding, ding, you have a key. You remembered you have a key. You know what this does, Mr. Vincent? It means everything you have narrated that the ambassador did, everything that you have given as an account, you took it all back by your actions of going to fist fight with the ambassador. A DHM, a whole DHM, a head of mission, representing the image of President Barrow in that country, representing the image of the Gambia in that country, representing every Gambia. You go into an ambassador's office to fight with the ambassador for a utility car that is neither yours nor the ambassador's. And then you write an account to try to justify yourself. Just like the ambassador writing to say that, oh, I respected the flag of the Gambia. I respected the picture of President Barrow behind me. But you stated that you said to him, come and deal with me. And you got up. You said that. If you were respecting the flag, if you were respecting the Cuban flag, you were respecting the Gambian flag, you were respecting the image of the Cuban president and respecting the image of President Barrow, when he said he was going to come deal with you, you should have just kept quiet and left him to talk. But you said you got up. The only reason why I could explain is that probably, one beat the other person up. No matter what, it defies logic. I don't care whose image was behind the ambassador. You don't sit there and a person is slapping you and punching your face and you put your hands in your pocket and say, I am respecting the flag of the Gambia. I am respecting the image of President Barrow. That was a lie. That is not true. I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. That is not a factual narration of what happened. It's either you were outpowered and beaten or you fought back, but your fighting back was not adequate. But please spare us the bit about respecting the image of the president and respecting the Gambian flag. It makes no sense. It's devoid of logic. I'm not going to be beaten up and there's a Gambian flag behind me and I put my hands in my pocket and I say, okay, fine, I'll be getting the slaps and the... No way. That doesn't happen. It's not a normal human instinct or reaction. So both of these accounts, as far as I'm concerned, is trying to paint the other bad. It's trying to paint the other in the wrong light. Both of them are not fit to represent the interests of the Gambia abroad. Both of them don't understand the diplomatic need of the Gambia in Cuba. Both of them don't understand the attitude that guides the diplomat. And both of them don't understand how to run an embassy effectively. And finally, they don't have diplomatic training. They don't have diplomatic training. Because that issue could have been better handled. The permanent secretary would have addressed that in his sleep. He would have called the ambassador and tell the ambassador, hand over the keys to the deputy head of mission. Or tell the deputy head of mission, take a taxi, keep your receipt, claim it back, just go home. Get out of the office. Diffuse the tension. But because you have diplomats who are not adequately trained, you have diplomats who don't understand the needs of what it is that takes them to that post, that is what you have. So all their narrations, it was trying to paint each one of them in good light. But it is a shame that the ambassador never saw the need to make mention of all the insubordination that he stated of the deputy head of mission to the permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who would have addressed the issue. And finally, the government must understand that the foreign service of the Gambia is not and cannot be a dumping ground. The government must understand that the foreign service of the Gambia cannot and should not and must not be made to be a dumping ground. It is one of the most pivotal ministries in that country because it represents the image of Gambia abroad. It represents the interest of Gambia. What does Gambia have? What does Gambia have? How many things, how many products do we have? What do we produce? What do we manufacture in Gambia? From time immemorial, from the time of Sadauda, they saw the need. From the founding fathers after independence. They knew and understood the need to have an effective foreign service, because that was what was Gambia's best interest. I see all the people that are saying, oh, the foreign service is so expensive. It is expensive to run a foreign service. If you don't put money into your foreign service, your returns would be useless, it would be minimal, and it would be non-existent. If you want to do now an accurate audit of what these embassies are returning vis-a-vis what is being pumped into these embassies, I mean, some of them will just be shut down and closed because it is as good as useless. But a diplomat is not determined by Gambia. Who a diplomat is not determined by the government of the Gambia or what people say. In 1961, these people came together, states came together, countries came together. They knew there has to be a regulation for their interest abroad. And they saw that these individuals would be special. They would be well taken care of because they are the ones that bring in the returns. That is why a legal framework was set and laid out for diplomats, for people that are representing the interests of the Gambia abroad. So you cannot wishy-washy it because it will be detrimental to you. There has to be a stop. There has to be a stop of political interference in the foreign service. It has to stop. If it does not stop, we will continue to embarrass ourselves. The foreign service will continue to be a lame duck. The foreign service will continue to be ineffective, and people will be there for their interest. People will serve their own purpose. People will serve at their own pleasure and not the interest and or pleasure of the Gambia. You cannot have a country where the president cannot want to put his people and people that owe allegiance to him in the foreign service. It happens anywhere in the world, even in the Western world, even in England, even in America. It happens everywhere. But go through the right process. If you want Lamin to serve in Washington, send Lamin to the foreign ministry. Let Lamin be adequately trained. Send Lamin to training programs and prepare Lamin for Washington. Prepare Lamin for Washington. And then send Lamin to Washington. Don't just get up. You bypass Modu that has been dealing with the bilateral relations of Banjul and Washington. That understands the nitty-gritties of that relation. That understands the needs of Gambia in that particular location. You bypass him, and because he's not politically expedient, and you take a non-knowledgeable person and send them to Washington. You're shooting yourself in the foot because you're not going to get the returns that you want. You're not going to get the returns that you desire. And this is the fact. You cannot say the president cannot have people, the NPP party cannot put people in the foreign service. No, that's not true. That would be false. That would be false. You can say that for all parties. All parties. Before the breakdown of relations between the UDP and the NPP, you had embassies that had UDP militants. So this cuts across board. It is not just about the NPP. It is not just about the president's interference in the foreign service. This is what is done because you want to leverage on your support. You want people that have the allegiance to you, represent your interest. But my friend, let them be adequately trained. I'll tell you, I'll give you a personal experience of what happened when I got to the foreign ministry. I was a lawyer when I was working at the foreign ministry. I don't think I'm the dumbest of person either. But when I got to that ministry, I studied my way around, and I knew that regardless of how smart I was, regardless of how qualified I was, I needed to understand the basics of diplomacy. I needed to understand the basics of foreign policy. I needed to understand what was Gambia's need. What was the need of the ministry to perform, to thrive? What was the need of the ministry to support government's agenda, government's interest, both locally and internationally? And what did I do? I realized when I got to that ministry that nobody wanted to go on training. There are so many trainings that are available at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but nobody wants to go on training because these trainings, you don't have per diems. You're not paid per diems to go on trainings. You are not paid per diems to go on training, so nobody wants to go on training. So what did I do? I decided, rather than chase per diems, rather than go around attending meetings, I would go and develop myself. I would go and develop myself. And I had a permanent secretary at the time, bless him, His Excellency Ambassador Njoguba, who was the permanent secretary at the time. He saw people in his ministry and would tap into their resources. He knew you were good in this area and he saw the need. Okay, you know what? You need to go and get yourself trained. You need to go and get yourself trained. I went to Pakistan. I attended the Pakistan Foreign Service Academy. I got myself adequately trained. Understood the nitty-gritties of diplomacy. Understood what it means, because when you go and train in the Foreign Service Academy abroad, you're not only trained in a particular area. It's a holistic approach, and you're trained in every single area and sector of the diplomatic corps. I came back from Pakistan. I saw another training to go in China. I went to my permanent secretary. I said to him, I want to go and train myself. People were rushing to go for meetings because they were getting a lot for per diems. Everybody wants to go and attend a meeting. If you go for a UNGA meeting for 2 weeks, you come back, you're rich. I go to Pakistan, I come back with nothing. But I have the knowledge base. Today, I'm not in the Gambia, but nobody can take that knowledge from me. My certificates are here. Nobody can take it away from me. Today I can sit and talk about foreign policy issues. I can delve into diplomacy to its very depth, to its very core, because I understood, because I was adequately trained. I went to Pakistan. I went to China. I came back. I saw another training. Geneva. I went to Geneva because I opted to train. I have spoken to staff and I've said to them, there's a training. They don't want to go. They tell you, I don't want to go. It was the first time in my life that I saw that. There are people in the foreign ministry that don't want to go on training. They would tell you they don't want to go. Everybody wants to go to that meeting that they would be paid per diem. And then you have a foreign service cadre that is not adequately trained because nobody wants to be trained. It should be a common denominator, a common basic requirement that before you serve in any post abroad, before you represent the Gambia's interest in any mission abroad, you are adequately trained in foreign policy issues, you are adequately trained in diplomatic matters, and you understand the needs of the Gambia. You must have been stationed at the headquarters. You must have been stationed at the foreign ministry. When I got to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was a lawyer. I didn't know anything. I've never worked in the foreign ministry before. I didn't even know how to write a note verbal. I didn't know how to write a diplomatic note. But I can tell you, because I had a brilliant permanent secretary, a person of great standing, and this was not a man that just came. This was a man, just like we have the permanent secretary today. This was a man that has served as an ambassador. This was a man that had been permanent secretary before. This is a man who had gone through the ranks of the foreign ministry, gone through the ranks of the foreign service cadre. Sometimes he would tell me to go to work on a Saturday. He would go over my work. I remember the first time he gave me a speech to write for the president. I came, I wrote the president, he took a red pen and he scribbled on my page and told me it was nonsense. He sat me down and made me do it again. And I remembered one time, I don't know if he's watching or if he will ever come across this video. At one time, I sat down and I wrote a speech for the president. And I went into his office. It was a Saturday. He was working in his office. I was working in my office. And I went and I gave him the speech. He came back to my office. I'll never forget that day. He said to me, Mr. Roberts. I said to him, yes, sir. P.S. He said, I hope you did not plagiarize. I said, what do you mean? He said, it is flawless. He said, I've gone through it up and down. I can't find any fault. Did you copy it? I said, no, sir, I did not copy it. But I took the points you gave me. I took the points you gave me. I had just returned from Pakistan, where I was adequately trained, an intensive training for diplomats. I was writing cabinet papers. I was writing strategy documents. I was writing policy documents for the foreign ministry because I decided I wanted to be adequately trained. I had a permanent secretary who was from the Ministry of Justice, Safi Sankare. We would sit in her office. She would go through things with me. We collectively we decided this ministry cannot be like this. It cannot be like this. There were agreements that were in that office since 19 Jumulum that were never ratified. We decided upon ourselves we were going to get this thing. The PS Foreign Affairs, Safi Sankare at the time, she was PS2, decided, you know what? All these agreements have to be ratified. We are going to ratify this agreement. We're going to take them to Parliament. We're going to table it in Parliament. We're going to discuss them. Oh, yes. But now, you see people working in our missions abroad, they can't even write a letter. I read the letter, I read it out, the narration from the ambassador. I read the narration from the deputy head of mission. Boy, those were not typographical errors. Those were grammatical incorrectness. That was not typographical error. Those were an abuse to the English language. Future tense being used mixed with present tense. Writing in the first person, second person, third person, all mixed together, juxtaposing up and down. The sentence structure was abysmal. And these are the individuals that are representing your interests abroad. How shameful. How shameful. I'm sorry, but we need to do better. And we can do better and must do better. And must do better. I saw the bit in that narration. That should be a disgrace. That shouldn't come out. That's a whole disgrace, because even though the ministry is sending a delegation to investigate, boy, there has to be an investigation on the ministry as well. It's stated there that the first secretary, that the permanent secretary, they stayed at the ambassador's residence. This is a custom, I understand. But these individuals were paid per diem to pay for lodging and boarding. Why should the ambassador host them and yet still they have been paid per diem? And then the ambassador claims reimbursement of $1,000 to host the very individuals who had collected checks from government to pay per diem, to pay their hotel bills, to pay their food and feeding. It defies logic. So I hope the investigators would harp on that as well. And that is a common practice across the civil service. You go, you collect per diems, £1,000, £2,000, £3,000. You go to as if you're gonna pay hotels, you're gonna buy food, but then you go and stay with the staff of the mission in that particular place. And that is why people were arguing that why do they need to go? Why can't those staff in those particular locations represent the interests of Gambia? Why do you have to send staff to go abroad to sit in meetings when you already have staff that are stationed there? And I keep telling people the answer is simple, because the staff that are stationed in those ministries don't have the required knowledge, skill, and understanding to represent the Gambia's interests. So if they don't have it, the Gambia must send people that they believe can adequately participate in those meetings, in those deliberations, so that they can come back to Banjul with tangible returns. With tangible returns. I have gone to meetings with government officials who, we step foot in the airport, they vanish. You don't see them again until the day that you are leaving and they come back to the airport. That's when you see them. If you go to the market, they will be there. You go to the shopping malls, they will be there. You tell me this because I'm talking out of experience, because I know it and I've lived it. I went to the heads of government meeting in Addis Ababa with my minister and the then Vice President Fatoumata Tambajang. I came back. Immediately I got back, my permanent secretary said to me, when am I having your report? I did a comprehensive report in conjunction with the deputy head of mission that was in Addis Ababa at the time. And we sent it to the office of the president. I went to China, I came, I did a comprehensive report. How many of our civil servants are even reporting on the meetings that they have attended? And the ones that have reported, you ask me, I made a report. I would never forget, at the time, the permanent secretary at the office of the vice president was a lady, Nancy Jai. I did a comprehensive report and I took it to her office. I delivered it myself. And that is why when there was a disaster task force, she called the Foreign Affairs and recommended that I sit in that task force. Because I don't just go for meetings. I make sure I come back with a report. It is presented to my permanent secretary and then it is sent to the office of the vice president or the president's office. Now you have to ask the question again. Are these reports looked at? Are they looked at? I went to Pakistan, I came back. I saw the many opportunities in Pakistan. All the progressive nations, the largest nations, the wealthiest nations of this country, they all have a diplomatic presence in Pakistan. The amount of factories, the amount of industries you have in Pakistan is unmatched anywhere else. Anywhere else that I've been to. I came back. People were calling. Factory owners. People that were in the football industry. People were in the medical equipment industry. Supplying England, America. You did a report. And the report sits there and it gathers dust. It gathers dust. Because there's no implementation. There's no follow-up. Because everybody is paddy chasing. Paddy hunters. Nobody wants to be adequately trained. Nobody wants to understand the needs of the ministry. You have instances where people will call from office of the president and just give instructions to the permanent secretary without going through protocol. Or the president says this. The president says that. 90% of the time the president don't even know what's going on. Put this person there. Put that person there. This is my friend. Oh, I will not recall her. She will be there. Meanwhile, you will recall other people to come back. When it is pleasing to you, when you feel it is to your advantage, you would enforce the foreign service regulations. You would tell them they have to be recalled. They have to come back home. But when it is not pleasing, you will ignore it, give it a blind eye, and leave people serving in mission for 15, 16 years, 10 years, 7 years. So the investigators on the investigation shouldn't only stop at that. There has to be an overhaul in the foreign service. There has to be an overhaul in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs must implement the foreign service regulations